Hey everybody, it's Mark, your friend from Slot Journal. Today I want to get into another subject similar to some stuff I had done before, and it's basically creating buildings for your track. Now, I've done some other examples of this previously, and that was a building in the round. What I'm going to show you today is a couple things. One, a low profile building I'm creating for a townscape, but also I'm getting in a little bit more into creating buildings based on the type of track you're building, and that's kind of like the geographic location, the locale, the climate, all those type of things. Because you want to have authentic looking track, and that includes the architecture that you're trying to copy on your track. So what I'm going to show you today is how to do that, and there's a process I use which involves some planning and research. And when we're done today, we'll get you through to the point where we're going to put some windows in. But this is like part one of this process, which I'm going to talk about today. So let's get going. As I've mentioned before, I wanted to place my track in Switzerland. Now, there's lots of reasons for that. I won't get back into everything about that, but I've decided that it offers many styles of landscape. There's hills, there's mountains, there's lots of interesting variations that I thought I could use to help build my track and make it interesting. Also, there's a lot of interesting and varied architecture. In particular, I'm a fan of medieval and traditional building styles. Switzerland has lots of that, and there's also lots of color and a variety in the kinds of buildings you'll find there. The other thing it did was gave me the ability to mix parts of the track in mountains and hills, parts running through a town, which I thought add a lot of interesting there because I wanted those features to be in my track. The next step involves some measuring and some planning. First of all, you have to ask yourself some questions. And number one is, how much room do I have for buildings around the track? You have to be realistic about this. And you have to think about where will those buildings be located. For example, if you're putting buildings in the middle of the track, it offers a lot of room, and you can build some pretty interesting stuff there. But you also have to consider track views. You don't want something in the middle of the track blocking views of one lane or another or different parts of the track. Also, if you're building in the middle of the track, you're building in the round. You're going to build all four sides of a building. That takes more material, it takes more time, and you have to just develop more detail in the building. So that's something you want to think about. Another option, especially if your track is up against a wall, is putting buildings around the edge of the track. This offers some advantages because you're building basically a facade, maybe some very short sides, and it makes the use of less material, that option available to you. You don't have to worry about building a back, and it makes things a lot easier. Also for wiring, planning some other aspects of those buildings. Next thing you have to think about, what buildings are absolutely necessary. Now, most everybody wants grandstands and pits, maybe refreshment area for the crowd, things like that. But other kinds are optional. If you're going through a town, do you want commercial buildings like, stores or restaurants, or maybe a hotel, something like that? Those are things you want to think about as well. You can basically put your priorities where you really need them. Next, how will those structures relate to and complement one another? If your track and your grandstands are in one section of your track, they may not have to relate so much to the other buildings if the other part of the track is running through a town. But if they're close, you may want to, have them relate to one another a little bit more. If the buildings are to be lighted, you want to work out a wiring plan too before you get too much in depth, where you're going to run those wires to put those lights in those buildings. And also, once you're finished, work up a list of all those buildings you'll need, all the dimensions you have for each one, so you have a planning place to start. The next major step is you want to research examples. Now, in the old days, we'd look through a photo or a travel book or something, but today we can just go into our computer, do a Google image search, and a web image search for whatever you want. If you're building, again, I'm building in Switzerland, if you're building in Great Britain, if you're building in another place like Germany, or in America, if you're doing it in a small town, in the desert, in the mountains, all those kind of things, you can find that area and do image searches to see what the structures and buildings look like in that geographic region. Think about what makes those buildings unique. After a while, if you look at enough, you'll develop an eye for the style. Another thing you want to do, and this is kind of important, is consider the difficulty each example poses for your skill level. If you're a beginner, you don't want to pick a building or something that's really detailed or really complex and large, and you're spending so much time building that you're not making progress on any other parts of your track. Sometimes you want to save those for last, but really be realistic about your skill level. Maybe don't bite off more than you can chew. Think about the structure too. Is it appropriate for the space you have? If a building normally is a large type of building and you don't have the space for it, don't try to shoehorn it or make something to fit that space. It's not going to look realistic. And also, and this is a trick I've used before, if you're building from scratch, that's one thing, but can you get a head start by adopting an existing model or maybe even converting a toy to fit your landscape? I'll get a little bit more into that later. I'll show you some examples of some things I did, but that can give you a head start and make the job a little bit easier. Here you can see the essential structure of the building. The one I'm making here, it's a 2-story. The structure is made from just basic cardboard. Nothing fancy, because it's either going to get covered with a printed material or maybe some light paint just to cover it and give it the texture that I need. What I'm doing here is cutting the gable that's going to go on the upper part of this. And it's pretty simple geometry. I'm just cutting it here, and then I'll make a section on the bottom here. You'll see when I fold that, it'll give it some structure. A little bit of cutting and test fitting here. At this point, we've got the central window marked out, and we're going to cut that. What I need to do here is to strengthen the structure a little bit to ensure that it stays square. So I've cut these little foam blocks out of some insulation. I'm going to glue those in place. It'll just hold that front facade and that support base square, just to make sure shape stays consistent. hold it there for a minute so it's dry. I'm just using a hot glue gun. This Ryobi portable hot glue gun uses a battery power, and might seem a little clunky, but surprisingly it works pretty well, and it's really convenient, even though it's a little bit bigger than the plug-in models you use. But I really am very happy with it. Here's a test fit. See how this is going to go. It's just going to get glued on top of that existing facade. I think what I did here is I had a little bit of uneven portion here. Nothing about this was perfect, and it doesn't have to be. So I just cut a little shim here to put underneath and make sure that the gable section will sit level. You won't see that at the end. It'll be covered by a piece of trim anyway. So yeah, you can see that gap, but you won't see it in the finished product. So we're pretty satisfied with that. Now this first floor is going to have a brick front. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to cut that out. And this is printed. That pattern was printed from a computer. I just found a texture, print out on my color printer. And it was printed on self-adhesive paper. It's basically like a big label. So we'll get this trimmed out so it'll fit precisely. And then what we'll do is we'll get that folded, separated, and then we'll stick it on. These corners are always so hard to find. Be as precise as we can to place that, and just wrap it around the corners, stick it on. And here we just trim out the windows and doorway, and we'll fold this back in on inside. Sometimes we have a short piece of this adhesive paper, it doesn't want to stick as well as you'd like it to, so use a little bit of extra glue to make sure it stays put. Now in this case, for this exterior, we did use this printed brick pattern, but that's a nice thing about scratch building. You can use just about any kind of finish or texture you want. You could do a stone print and use that, or you could just paint it. You could incise the front with maybe like a clapboard pattern. There's so many choices, things you can do. If you'd made this out of foam core in the front, you could have maybe embossed that. I've done that before to make a stone look. You know, choices here are almost endless. But for variety's sake, I'll do something like this where I just use this paper, this printed pattern. And you'll see we got a brick front. Now we've got a doorway trimmed out here, and again, this is like heavy, real heavy card. Just cut it to fit the doorway dimensions, and rather than painting with a brush, I just use a marker. Just so much faster. hit the front, hit the edges, and you can get this done pretty quickly. And I'll end up doing the same thing with the window frames. And again, you could trim these out of, real thin wood. I just find the card looks just about the same, holds up fine, and it's a lot cheaper, and basically it's easier to cut as well. So we'll get these test fitted. Get a little bit of our hot glue on here, and then we'll apply these door and window frames. And there we go. First floor is essentially complete. So the next thing we want to do here is we're going to cut some trim. This will probably go here between the first and second floor. Again, older traditional looking buildings, it's pretty typical that they would have some, a lot of trim and some ornate decoration on them. So what we'll do here, we'll trim this what we need and go ahead, use our markers again. Get that colored in, and then we'll apply it. What we do here, we not only apply the face but also the edges so that everything looks consistent color. And what this allows us to do is not only, decorate the building itself, but it helps hide those seams and the edges that we don't want anybody to see. Again, it's the seam between the textured paper and the rest of the building. And that one piece is nice, but we really want to double up on that section, make it a little bit thicker. We'll do one here for the top as well. This will hide that seam there where the gable end wasn't quite level, and a pretty big seam there, but again, this will hide that nicely so you won't see it. After I did that first one between the first and second floor, I decided I wanted a little bit thicker on the place above it, so we'll go ahead and get that trimmed. What you do here to turn that corning and make it just a very shallow cut at that intersection there, so that when you bend that piece of stock, it'll fold nicely, nice and straight. In most construction projects like this, I really prefer to use the hot glue when I can. It just makes it a lot faster to work. Dries right away and just helps me get the job completed a lot faster. So one of the other features here I wanted to put on again for this traditional building, flower boxes. Again, this is the same kind of cardstock that I cut the trim out of. Just trimmed it, folded it over, made some little flower boxes. Apply these, and we'll fill them in later on. But again, it's just nice to have them. What we're going to do here is apply. We've got the roof applied. You can see the cardboard there. There's a gable in the front, and we're going to cover that with some, well, basically in Europe, pretty common in Germany and Switzerland, places, Austria, you'll find these roof tiles. I decided it would be appropriate for this particular building, so we're going to put these, we're going to apply them. Just, again, you cut them so that they go a certain direction, and like regular shingles, you start at the bottom and we work our way up. And just apply them in even rows, working our way up the roof. And this is a real simple method. It's easy to do and gives a building like this a real authentic look. What you can do as well on a roof like this, you can dry brush this with a different color, maybe a little bit of brown, just lightly, or maybe even a lighter color. If you want to give a little more of an aged or distressed look, give it, some kind of look like that, it's very easy to do after you get these applied. In my case here, I think I left these normal. I didn't really do anything extra. So we got one more regular one here to put on this section. And then we're going to put a topper on this to get to cover the very top angle, which is a typical method you see on a tile roof over in Europe. get the crown of this roof. We're going to cut this, and the ribs will go in the opposite direction. And the essential structure of the house is complete. Now here you can see a couple views. On the left, you'll see the house as it was finished. I got a coat of paint on it, a little more trim, some boards along the top of the gable there. And then on the right hand, you can see the house after we applied the windows. Again, these are printed on paper, and there's a doorway. And in the next episode, I'll show you how we do that. So that's kind of the end of part one on this particular project. What I'm hoping to do here is just show you some options you have for building buildings. You know, scratch building like this. Again, it's just one option you have. We all know there's some great kits out there available, other types of buildings, other methods and techniques you can use. But it doesn't always have to be real expensive materials. In this case, you can see I just used some plain cardboard. We can dress it up a little bit with some other materials to make a final product that, you know, really looks good. But there's a lot of different ways to do that. What we'll do in this, again, we covered this. Next video, I'm going to cover basically taking that project that we created so far, putting windows in it. I'll show you how we create those windows, how we put them in, wire things up. And I'll also talk a little bit about some of the software I've used to do some of these projects in the past. The interesting thing is there's some really great new options out there. You don't have to be a software expert, but it's a tool that can really help you, really finish up some of your projects and get some nice details in there that really is going to make your buildings and other projects look really good. And again, if you look at these, if you see there's a way maybe I could do a better job of showing you or demonstrating some of these techniques, let me know in the comments. I'd certainly like to improve these videos as much as I can and make them useful for you. And don't forget, if you like this kind of content, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. You can also visit on Facebook at Slot Journal. And until then, look forward to seeing you next time.